If you ever watched How It's Made on the Discovery Channel, you would see two things about how, well, everything is made. First of all, about half of all things start with a roll of sheet steel, gets unwound and pressed into the shape of something. The second thing is that everything is made with a sort of light funk soundtrack. Okay, so when it comes to bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States, how do we bring the funk? Somebody's got to bring the funk, right? Well, there are three reasons why reshoring has become a big issue lately. Reshoring is simply the idea of taking those American manufacturing operations that have moved overseas to developing nations and getting them to come back to America or other countries, as it were, in the developed world. And by developing nations, we basically mean China. I mean, we say developing world because it's a little bigger than China, but that's the main one, right? There are three main reasons for doing this, and we should go over all of them because this is a very hot topic. The most important one has to do with what we would call SCM, or supply chain management. Supply chain management is simply taking care of all of the connections that are necessary to make sub-assemblies that go into assemblies that go into a final product. See, long ago, Henry Ford built the River Rouge plant where you had sand go in and iron ore and coal, and out came cars. Pretty much, okay? Everything was contained in one plant. That's the way it was 100 years ago, and it was a great development. But nothing is made that way anymore. In fact, large corporations farm out pretty much everything. The process of making a car, a final assembly plant, like say the Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, is really just that final assembly. That's mostly what they do there. There's some body work and painting and things like that, but it's really just putting it all together. Uh, the parts come from all over the world. And the length of that supply chain has a lot to do with it. I mean, for example, you can source out to China printed circuit boards. And there are hundreds of companies in Shenzhen. I was going to call one of them out, but there are so many of them that will just, you send them computer design for your circuit board with all of the connections and the holes for the screws and all that, and they'll print it up right away. And they'll stick it in a boat, and it takes 3 weeks to get to you. Now, if they made a mistake, you won't find out about it for 3 weeks, is really what it comes down to. That's the whole issue. Yeah, they're cheaper. I mean, yeah, the shipping from Shanghai to Oakland is only $1,300 for a full container. I mean, it would be just pennies per board by the time you filled a container with them, but it's 3 weeks. And let's just say something happens in China. Let's just say, I don't know, ooh, a virus. Okay. The whole process of supply chain management breaks down. Now, supply chain management is a critical part of what we would call TQM, or total quality management. This area is just full of TLAs, or three-letter acronyms. Deal with it. The reason why controlling your inventory isn't so much that you have all these semi-finished goods that are eating up money, that's a working capital. Capital's pretty cheap these days. That was the original reason for doing it. The main reason is of being concerned about your supply chain is quality. If something goes wrong in a four-step process and you have 3 weeks of inventory all the way along, you just made 12 weeks worth of crap, okay? That's the issue at hand. And that's why JIT, or just in time delivery, told you, three-letter acronyms, is so important. It's not so much about squeezing cost as it is about improving quality, adding more value to the product. We learned this when the virus hit and supply chains broke all over the world. The length of the supply chain suddenly became very, very important. Now, companies have been aware of this for years. This has been a trend that's been going on for a long time. In fact, 5 years ago, I ran into a woman who was a clothing buyer for Target. She went off to Hong Kong all the time. And she said, within 5 years, I can see all of this coming back to the United States because this is ridiculous. We have to plan things out a year in advance. We have to know the fashion. We have to be in touch with the quality. And the people in Hong Kong, they don't make the clothes anymore. They farm it out to other places like Myanmar or whatever. Hong Kong is basically a broker between the developed world and the developing world. That's one of their niches. And she's like, if we could just find a way to do this with assembly line fixtures, rather than people, all of this will come back to America. And it is. It is coming back to America. These shirts I have are all custom made in the USA, right? That's why I like them. Okay. So that's reason number one is managing the supply chain and quality has just been an issue for many years. Companies are slow to bring these operations back. In fact, they may not control many of them. They might be separate companies, and they may not be able to find the circuit board manufacturer in their hometown. The second reason for discussing reshoring or onshoring is jobs. I mean, Ohio is the classic swing state for a very good reason. It votes Republican one year, Democrat the other, Republican the next year. I mean, they literally swing back and forth. Every year they seem to vote for another group of people, hoping that something will change, and nothing ever does. I mean, it's been 20 years. Between 2000 and 2010, we lost a third of the manufacturing jobs in the United States. Okay. It was a serious thing. We've gotten some of them back since 2010, but it's been a real slow crawl. And that classic American manufacturing job just doesn't exist the way it used to. Now, manufacturing is down to just 11% of our economy. But here's the ticket, it's only 6.5% of all the jobs, only 13 million jobs in a 200 million workforce. All right? It doesn't provide that many jobs. But because of that high productivity per employee, they tend to be the highest paid jobs. And we classically think of them as jobs that you can get like right out of high school with low skills and work your way up. That still kind of happens, but in a world of total quality management, no, it's not the same anymore. These are highly technical, specialized operations. The idea of unskilled labor going in and building cars at the River Rouge plant, that's just antique thinking. We can't go there. We need the skills first and foremost. But Ohio and Michigan, I mean, they're still desperate. They still need something to replace what was lost way back when. And here's the ticket. Who took those jobs? I mean, was it China? During that time when America lost a third of its manufacturing jobs, in the same period, the value of manufactured goods went up 20%. I know it looks like everything is made in China these days, but it's the low value added stuff that's made in China. Now, I've discussed before the overhead per employee, what a problem that is, that we need to encourage more employees, but it wasn't China that took our jobs, it was robots, okay? There is so much evidence to support that. When jobs come back to the United States, or manufacturing comes back rather, the jobs are not necessarily going to come with it. That's the problem. It is still only 6.5% of the workforce. All right? But that's the second reason. The third reason is a strategic one. I mean, we have a certain president who really hates China, and honestly, the relationship with China is a difficult one at best. The United States has played a long game. Basically, the Chinese Communist Party believes that there is a separation that can be made between economic freedom and political freedom. They believe that they are two separate things. I think that's completely ridiculous, and I think this is the Achilles heel. This is the wedge that can be driven. And that's kind of been American policy since the beginning. So we've been patient, we've been waiting. And a lot of people are sick of waiting. In fact, 67% of the population, including 62% of all Democrats, have negative views about China after the coronavirus. Now, this has been building for many, many years, like everything else I'm talking about here. It's just that the virus puts a spotlight on it. Okay? What is our relationship with China? Or for that matter, what should it be? Now, last year we had a $458 billion worth of imports from China. It's only 2.2% of our gross domestic product, people. Yes, it's a big number, but almost half of it was electronic goods. All right, all the cell phones and all that, $200 billion, 1% of our GDP. It's really not a huge number, but it is very visible, and well, there's a political impetus. Given that industry is looking at reshoring to shorten supply chains, a lot of politicians probably want to take credit for something that's going to happen anyways, right? Kind of nice, isn't it? All right. But there is a question about what are those critical industries. I mean, a roll of sheet steel needs to be available to manufacturers if you're going to have any other thing, any other manufacturing base. It's a critical industry that enables other industries. Do we have manufacturers of sheet steel? Yeah, we've pretty much got that all over the place. How about those electronic boards in Shenzhen? Ooh, yeah, we don't have that, right? You pretty much got to get them from Shenzhen, right? Okay, that's an enabling technology that we just don't have. And so, well, the question becomes, what isn't an enabling technology? I mean, really, if you're going to emphasize politically and subsidize reshoring things, where do you stop? Where does it end? And for that matter, when you look at it, you might say, okay, look, China is a very different place because of the Communist Party and a very different economy. It's very top down. Yeah, well, South Korea has a very different economy from the United States. It's also extremely top down. What's the difference? Well, the difference is largely political. I mean, in South Korea, they have a strong rule of law and they have free expression and a democratically elected state. So the fact that they have this top down economy, which is kind of vaguely socialist, may not be a problem. In China, we can't claim those three things. And so, you know, as patient as we've been trying to exploit that difference between political and economic freedom, maybe it's time to make a change. I'm not saying one way or the other. I can see both sides in this one. But politically there is an impetus to reshore everything. So what does it come down to really? Reshoring, bringing factories back to the United States. Well, what it comes down to is managing the supply chain and managing all of the partners that come into it so that things don't break when there's an event like this, like the coronavirus. All right. It would be great to have jobs come back, but honestly, they're going to be very different jobs than what everybody's thinking about. It's not your classic 1950s low skill assemble car jobs. And thirdly, there are some strategic considerations. Uh, I support the market economy, but at some point there's kind of this mercantile view that the wealth of nations needs to have some basic industries. But where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? What is politically acceptable? What is economically acceptable in terms of subsidization from a government? Huge open questions. But reshoring is an important point, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about it. All right? I'll see everybody.